Well, the Historical Society began under another name. It was known as the Lackawanna Institute of History and Science. And it got its charter in 1886.
This is the original charter of the Lackawanna Institute of History and Science, which is how the organization was incorporated in 1886. Today's Lackawanna Historical Society, representing and dealing with the entire county of Lackawanna. And Lackawanna, by the way, the county was created in 1878. Prior to that, we were part of Luzerne. And prior to that, Luzerne was part of Northumberland. So August 1878, a vote is taken, and this county is created. Not really secession, but creation. So this is the youngest county in Pennsylvania, which is one of the oldest of the states. I find that of some amusement.
And I think it's rather ironic that the local judge who signed the charter was Judge Robert Woodrow Archbold. We have a bust of Judge Archbold right here in the collection, here in the Catlin House. But I say it's rather some irony there, because it would later be, out of his family that Mr. Catlin would be married. His first wife was an Archbold. And then eventually, of course, the house that they lived in here, or that he had built in 1912, would eventually become the headquarters for what would become the Lackawanna Historical Society.
This stuff here is mold. And we took this to Philadelphia, to the conservators at CCAHA, Center for Conservation of Art and Artifacts. They deal principally with things on paper, works of art on paper, more so than 3 dimensions. And they're very, very good conservators. And of course, all they can do with mold is stabilize it, kind of remove it, but they can't remove the stain. Anything that has gone, any of the writing, the ink, cannot be reconstructed. It is gone. And they're the ones who did this mount. This thing's called a mount. I'm going to turn it over. We've got this side here. We have some signatures of Benjamin Troop, William Connell, and so on. People that are well known then in the city and remain well known today. You can see in building the mount, they had to cut a hole and do a double mount, because this parchment was written on both sides. To my annoyance, obviously. Makes it hard to display. So, over here, it's signed by the recorder of records, E.D. Jenkins. So the charter originally was put in Lackawanna County records, just like one would do today when you're incorporating anything. And again, we have mold creeping in here, which is part of the mold from that side.
If you look at the Historical Society's history, you will see that when it was formed 8 years after Lackawanna County was formed. So that was a time where everything was fresh and new, and Lackawanna County was basically a young organization, a young community of people who were excited and proud. And so when the Historical Society was formed, I imagine everybody wanted to be part of it. It was important to start to document that history.
Circa 1920, plus minus 15 years either side, there were 2 people working here on the board. One was Thomas Murphy. He was president of the Board of Trustees. He was an editor for the Scranton newspaper, Times, I think. He also wrote the history of Scranton, 2 volumes. And in any clippings I've found of the period, he's very influential as a newspaper journalist and as a historian, bringing the 2 together, and was president and moved the society forward. And he had on the board also a man named Fletcher Wayburn, who was secretary back when the secretary was really a position of huge importance and represented the society out into the community. Fletcher, as I call him, got involved with a lot of writing and interviews and producing 10 and 12 page pamphlets by the hundreds. So they're still floating around.
The Scranton and the Lackawanna County and really the Northeast Pennsylvania area were, I think, a pivot point of history. At each of the historical periods that one could document, the contact period when Europeans were first interacting with native populations isn't well documented here. Some explorers associated with Champlain were thought to be the first Europeans to make a passage down the Susquehanna River from the Finger Lakes region down to the Chesapeake. Some of the English colonial settlements in Virginia and Baltimore and Maryland, and then the Penns coming in. So this area was still a Native American area up until the 1750s. The period right before the Revolutionary War with the Connecticut claim and the counterclaims of the folks that got their land title from the Penns, the Yankee-Pennamite War period, and then the massacre at Wyoming, I think were fascinating for me to read about, learn about here in some of the texts. But what really was the development of the iron furnaces and the railroad and anthracite industries that really got my interest, particularly the gravity railroads.
And in fact, every major industry that was constructed in America during that Industrial Revolution, you often hear, oh, the Industrial Revolution, was manifest in this tiny geographic area. You had iron and steel production, you had widespread coal mining, you had textile manufacture, you had education, you had food processing. There was an oil refinery. I mean, the list goes on and on. It was an amazing boiler of industrial activity.
The area of local history in which I'm most interested in is the economic history of this area. I view myself as sort of an economic philosopher. I'm a strong believer in capitalism, and this is the area that showed America how capitalism can really work. This area went from nothing in the 1840s, basically farmland, to one of the wealthiest areas in the country by the end of that century. And it was done purely through entrepreneurial spirit. People came here with the idea that they wanted to succeed, and they did.
The earliest buildings in downtown Scranton are the oldest buildings. They're relatively humble. For the most part, they are party wall, they are brick. The pattern of building then was to have brick sidewalls or firewalls with wood construction in between, maybe steel down the center, but wood frame. And windows only at the front and back. These buildings are relatively deep. The facades were relatively simple. We see a number of those buildings. There are still a few around Courthouse Square. We see a number of them on Lackawanna Avenue. And those are the oldest, the 1880s, 1870s, 1880 buildings. With more wealth and more style and more everything, we have some examples of higher, finer buildings, certainly in downtown Scranton. We also see a shift in scale, because the original buildings were 3 or 4 stories tall, and certainly by the 1920s, they're building things that are 9, 10 stories tall, steel frame, terracotta, very, very different. And so we have these buildings in the downtown side by side. The centerpiece of the downtown is the courthouse. It's built of the native West Mountain stone. It is in a chateau-esque style. It was designed to be a building in a park, which it is. And so it is not a box. It's very sculptural. It has a tower. It has parapets and a very shaped, distinctive roof line. So that building is very sculptural in nature and richly detailed. Beautiful monuments that surround that. The soldiers and sailors in particular, which is a Civil War memorial. It's a classical style column and with a colonnade at the base. All of the corners are marked with great statuary. We have the Board of Trade building on the north side, which is 507 Linden Street, and that's the building that people know as the Scranton, the Electric Building. And of course, very unique feature is the Electric City sign, and of course Scranton's nickname and the history of why we are called the Electric City. But we have that sort of fantastic steel frame and light bulb kind of sign that says Scranton, the Electric City. It's part of the, certainly part of the skyline. That sits on a copper framed roof with a very interesting profile. And then all the buildings on the other side of that street around it are down several floors below that, so that rise is above. On the east side of Courthouse Square, you're going to see considerably smaller buildings until you get to what was the old Store and Pfister building, which was a furniture store in late 19-teens, I think, 1920 kind of furniture store. It's now the county annex. And that reflects sort of that heyday scale of Scranton. 6, 7, 8 stories, steel frame, Chicago-style, terracotta facades. We have a number of buildings that fall into that same mode. The Scranton Life building, the Scranton Times building. They're really sort of Chicago school. Victorian or classical. There's a range of both in there. So you kind of see that that kind of great difference. It makes for a very interesting, playful kind of streetscape.
Some of the larger national stories that occurred during the 19th century related to immigration, related to the conflict between the northern and southern states, and the idea of slavery and the idea of freedom. The growth of the labor movement in the face of the development of the physical technology of the Industrial Revolution. All of that was really manifest here in the Northeast, in Scranton, in the Lackawanna Valley. We were a passageway on the Underground Railroad for many people getting freedom by escaping from slavery in the South. The building that I work in North Scranton, the Silkman House, the Silkmans were abolitionists. They associated with abolitionists in the community, and it's very likely that their home and their property was a safe house. They were personally associated with very close personal friendships with other folks in the community who also had safe houses. If they're interested in learning about the history of this community, this is the place to do it. I mean, this is the Lackawanna Valley community right here, our historic society. The Anthracite Museum is great. The museum associates are learning about the anthracite industry and the larger community of northeastern Pennsylvania. But the Lackawanna Historic Society itself is focused on our community and learning about, well, this person was from Scranton and they went out in the greater world and they did this, but this person was from Scranton and they stayed here and they did this.
As a child, I always had an interest in history, and especially in local history and in the neighborhood where I lived in. And this was an older gentleman, my cousin, and he decided to take me one day down to a Historical Society meeting. And from there, I got to know the people down here. There were 2 curators at the time, the Mattis brother and sister, Dorothea and Bob. They were old Scranton family. They had I believe it was their grandfather, who had been associated with the Scranton family back in the 1840s when the early steel industry began and all the other business opportunities began.
Bob and Dorothea Mattis were the caretakers and perhaps the early executive directors of the Lackawanna Historic Society. They actually lived in the apartment here in the Catlin House for a number of years in the 1950s. I don't know when they first moved in, but they were here, as I can recall, in 1956, 57, 58, and into the early 1960s. So they had a great love of the artifacts and the collections here, and they were also really good for getting a plate of cookies and milk after a long afternoon in the archives.
I've known 3 directors, and they've all been good. And Marianne Moran-S has managed to outlast all of them. But each of the directors has contributed, I think, in moving the society forward in their own areas of expertise.
Traditionally, historical societies were founded by interested citizens. Historical societies are of the people and for the people. That's what they exist for. So when historical societies are formed, especially one that is 125 years old, like ours, it tends to be interested citizens who are dabbling in local history, not necessarily professional historians, and certainly not professional curators. Back in 1886, I don't even know if the title existed. So through the years of the Historical Society, there have been many well-meaning volunteers who have done their best to collect and preserve Lackawanna County's history. I think that I'm very fortunate to have been trained as an anthropologist. I didn't realize when I was studying anthropology how important it would be in my particular career choice. I thought anthropology was the study of man, and I would look at history and how man evolves and what happens with people when they're in situations, mainly as a scholar, looking at how people act and what they do. But what I have realized in working here, because as the executive director, every day I get to deal with a diverse group of people, whether they be volunteers or visitors to the Historical Society or people in our history that I am researching.
One of my neighbors is Bernie McGurl, and he's head of the Lackawanna River Corridor Association, and he's an historian and poet. And we had talked about local history, and he mentioned the Lackawanna Historical Society, and so I looked this up in the phone book, and I think I called and actually talked to Mary and Moran, and we decided to collaborate on some projects. She knew I was a 4th grade teacher and was interested in bringing primary sources to my classroom. So we thought it was so important for us to visit different sites in the area so they could experience, the children could really experience that. So, you know, we talked a lot about the Patch Town. We took the kids to the Anthracite Heritage Museum, and we actually went through that and created stations. And one of the stations there shows how the people lived with their little stove, and you know, and everything was owed to the company store, and the people really struggled just to survive. And you know how the coal miner would work these huge days and only make a few cents. And most of the time they owed money to the company store. So we compared that to going to the Scranton estate, and you see these huge, you know, doors and the wood and the intricate, everything was so gorgeous and huge and big. And that would be like the coal baron, or, you know, and I thought the kids were just fascinated. My 4th graders were really touched by the difference, you know, the way the average person lived versus, you know, the people that own the coal mines.
I did my master's thesis for the university on the anthracite coal strike and the National Railroad strike in 1877. It was a railroad strike that started in West Virginia and spread along the different rail lines all the way through Chicago to San Francisco and down to St. Louis. It reached Scranton about a week after it began. Strike was a major issue in Scranton, mostly because it involved all the major industries in Scranton. In 1877, Scranton was the industrial center of the country. They provided the fuel that powered the Industrial Revolution, basically. When the strike reached Scranton, it actually started, the first ones to walk out at noon were the ironworkers from the ironworks. The railroad workers walked out at 6, and then a day later, the coal miners struck. So it shut down everything. For the first time, everything was silent in the city. There was no locomotives, no bells, no whistles. You couldn't hear the clang of the workers' hammers. The glow from the blast furnaces was out. The blast furnace fires were out for the first time since they had been built in the 1850s. It was a completely different landscape, even. There were men walking idly on the street corners just wondering what was gonna happen next. Nobody knew what was going on anywhere else. There was nowhere to get news and information into the city, short of like the stagecoach. The railroad strike started out as just a rejection of a wage cut. The iron industry also went on strike as a rejection of a proposed wage cut. The coal miners piggybacked basically on the strike and struck for a 25% wage increase. They were the only ones that had a progressive attitude toward the strike. They wanted to increase something. Everybody else just wanted to hold the line against what they had. So they struck from there. None of them were successful. Ultimately, at the end, they all went back for the same wages they had been working for previously.
The trouble with coal mining is you had different people from all different nationalities, and they had their own little church, and they had their own little bar, and their own little community where they, the Italians would be here growing their tomatoes, and then you would have the Polish people here and the Welsh people there. Johnny Mitchell realized that everybody was being used by the coal companies and abused terribly, and that the conditions were so horrendous, and everyone owed everything to the company store. And he saw beyond Italian and everything and united the people and said, we need to form a union. And that was an incredible undertaking that he did. And that, people a generation ago really know about Johnny Mitchell here. When I talked to my mother-in-law, who was a textile worker, she talked about people coming to the parades to Johnny Mitchell. And I took the kids to Courthouse Square, and we visited the statue of Johnny Mitchell. We even sang songs about Johnny Mitchell. So yes, and he united them. In 1902, there was a strike that, as I remember, hopefully I've got this right, pretty much put the company, the whole country out of business. And the president had to come and everything. Anyway, the workers got there, were able to work and do well with Johnny Mitchell. The conditions changed for them because of this one man. So, an incredible man.
The other day we were sorting out just piles of papers, just things from the past, trying to, what are we doing with these? Why do we have them? Do we want to keep them, type of thing. Found two little pieces of paper, blue ink on blue paper. One of them was a mileage chart, much like you see in a AAA map, of Scranton to Great Bend. And they went down to here's the Great Bend and here's Scranton. So Scranton to Great Bend's 40 miles. It was a Lackawanna and Western Railroad mileage chart done by hand. Now, I didn't say Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western. I said Lackawanna and Western. So this predates that railroad by a number of years. And with it, I found a note just on paper. These people didn't use full pieces of paper if they could help it, because paper cost money. So this is on maybe a third of a size of a sheet of paper. So they used the other 2/3 for something else. It's dated January 1st, 1851. And it says, it says Lackawanna Iron Coal Company, Lackawanna Iron Company borrowed from Philip Mattis $500. We will pay him back in a given time frame, regardless of defalcation. I've got to look that up. I think it means you can't default. Signed, Joseph Scranton and George Scranton. What? This is the founding of the Lackawanna iron furnaces. And they borrow $500 from Philip Mattis. And that Mattis family's still here. Scranton family's still here in the area. Whoa. So that's got my interest right now.
Actually, where the iron started years ago, there was iron before coal. I don't know if a lot of people realize that. That's how Scranton started. So the original furnaces are there. It's a great site. And unfortunately, it hasn't been used much in the past years. So a bunch of people basically got together, the Historical Society, the Anthracite Heritage Museum, one of our board members, Bob Savakinas from the Arts Council.
When I look at Rocky Glen Park and I look at its major history in our area for over 101 years, I look at the Scranton Iron Furnaces, and the Iron Furnaces is a site in downtown Scranton that has such a major role in the history and the development, the T-rail industry, the steel industry here in Lackawanna County. And because of a lack of people coming to visit the site, I mean, there's been rumors that the state may be interested in shutting it down or curtailing its hours of operation, which it's done. So I looked at the idea that we need to get a partnership put together, again, to try and get people to come to the Scranton Iron Furnaces. A couple of months back, what we started to do through the Historical Society and several other organizations, the Lackawanna Heritage Valley Authority, Northeastern Intermediate at 19, Steamtown, the Electric City Trolley Museum, and Lackawanna County, the commissioners, we put together a partnership to try and put a program down at the furnaces. And what we wanted to do was we put an industrial arts program together. It was called Arts on Fire.
And it turned into a wonderful program because Keystone College is one of what we call our Arts Engage programs, is another county program we fund so youth can have access to the arts. They happen to have a big iron sculpture class planned. So it was like the gods aligned, the stars aligned, excuse me, and everything came together. They did an iron pour into these molds that the kids had made. But then we also had vendors, even from outside the area, that came up. So we had artists selling their work, the iron pour, some demonstrations such as blacksmithing. Dan Perry, who's a wonderful resource in our community and works for the Heritage Valley Authority, gave a lecture while the iron was being poured.
They're going to blow off, they're going to pour molten iron in the vessel and then blow oxygen through the bottom. There's going to be a dramatic shower of sparks and then they'll pour off the steel. Thank you. It all works. As you use this soft part of the end right here, see those cut marks? Okay. And so what you want to do is get that a good carry weight, at least. And you can lay it on there and hammer that, right? And rotate that. And then you take care of the tongue and snap it off. No one go all over the
Another program that we've had twice is our friends at Dunmore Historical Society, Sal Mecca. One of the best programs I have seen in my 20 years at the Lackawanna Historical Society. Sal does a slide presentation or a PowerPoint on the Pennsylvania Gravity Railroad, and it's very important because it's a big part of our local history. Everybody talks about gravity railroads. Not everybody knows there were two gravities, and we hear more probably about the Delaware and Hudson Gravity Railroad because that's the one that I think people think of more just because of its proximity to the river and the valley, maybe. But the Pennsylvania Gravity Railroad, which went through Dunmore and up through the Music Mountains, Sal Mecca has documented precisely the route of the gravity, and he can take people through his PowerPoint on a journey through the Gravity Railroad, which is phenomenal. And those are the types of programs we really like to have to keep people interested and learning more. And they're newer, they're people who have been involved in research for a while, but they're newer presenters. So it's nice to see them evolve. It's nice to see someone come in with a topic and start to research it, and then suddenly see it turn into a book or a PowerPoint presentation or something that really becomes a tool to find new audiences to continue the cycle to promote and learn about local history.
He had a bell wire that was attached to that bell of a different tone. He would pull it 2 or 3 times. When the engineer heard the bell of a different tone ring 2 or 3 times, he knew that the trip was unhooked from the cable. He shut off the power, reversed the engines, and started applying power again.
And we have, as I said, shifted into using the arts to do programming that is entertaining and educational. So we opened a new door to get into some arts funding that we might not have seen in the past, which is extremely important right now because with the new state budget, we are going to lose $10,000 right off the top because that was general operating support that we received on a yearly basis, which was matched by Lackawanna County. I think Lackawanna County is going to continue to fund us the other half, but we're going to have to come up with new ideas and resources. So we're always trying to create interesting programs that will keep the activities funded.
We were really excited and thrilled to participate in the Iron Pour this year with the Arts on Fire. It really expanded the scope of the Iron Pour to involve students in the art program at Keystone College and involve other nonprofit community groups in the community and the actual outreach to look at the redevelopment of that immediate urban community near the iron furnaces. It's critical for us both to learn and appreciate what we have here, what we have been.
I mentioned earlier that we imported bituminous coal from England, but that's not the only thing we imported at the time. We needed iron T-rails to build our railroads. In Maryland, they were building iron T-rails. They were making iron T-rails, but they weren't making them fast enough. They had furnaces maybe half the size of our furnace here. So they could only make so many rails a day, and it wasn't hugely productive. You would think at the time that if you're going to need a lot of iron rails, you would make them as fast as you can, but they couldn't. Selden T had the idea. He told Mr. Lauder, he said, you know what, we'll make your rails for you, but we need your money.
Of course, I was involved with the German Historical Society with their play. Carbondale Historical Society is pretty big, and that's the pioneer city. There's a lot of history up there, and we're glad that they're there. And Mary Ann works with all of them. Just like I said, to share information and to organize different functions like heritage train rides. The Lackawanna Heritage Valley Authority hires us to ride on the trains in period clothing, and we'll leave Scranton and end up in Archbald or Carbondale on a steam locomotive, and it's just, it's a good time.
It's critical for us both to learn and appreciate what we have here, what we have been, how we have become what we are today, and where we're going in the future, because we have a large influx of new immigrants coming into the United States these days. And I think we have the strength of our community interactions here in the Lackawanna Valley is unique, and I think that our tradition of welcoming new groups. But I think we have maybe, well, something to challenge ourselves with on how we can accept these new groups and get them acculturated, get them to appreciate what we have long cared about our community, the family values that we have here, the community values that we have here, and the cultural values, the appreciations of ourselves as members of a community that you know, we have an identity here. And it's, you know, sharing that identity and helping new groups value that identity that I think our institutions are challenged to do now.
So you get this real feel for what history was all about in the area. And that's part of what we look at the Lackawanna Heritage Valley on a regular basis. We have a management action plan that guides us in what the projects we should be involved in. And one of the things you look at is that interpretive pie. Okay, who's doing transportation? And we need a trolley museum. And there's a wonderful art and science museum up in Naog Park, so that takes care of that piece of the pie. And you look at a place like the Lackawanna Historical Society or the Anthracite Heritage Museum over in McDade Park, and they're really the repositories. They hold the base documents that a lot of the other museums utilize on a regular basis, let alone the general public. But professionally, these resources are used extensively by their colleagues. The Scranton Lace Company was really an interesting place, and that's the company where Senator Hillary Rodham Clinton's father worked, and her grandfather. And I emphasize her grandfather in particular because her grandfather was a 50-year employee of the Scranton Lace Company. Came here as a young boy. He was, I think, 11 years old when he started working at the lace works, probably doing the work of children, which was very common at that particular time. And in her autobiography, she devotes a fairly substantial chapter to her grandfather and coming to visit him. And of course, the family still maintained ties with a home in Lake Winola. But that was the family ties. And in fact, the Lackawanna Historical Society has a design book that says Hugh Rodham, and it was her father's design book for lace. Every year they changed their lace patterns. They had their own advertising department, photography department, and so on. And the looms inside were massive looms. They were a story and a half tall and 60 feet long. They are huge. They're immense looms. And at one point, Scranton Lace Works was producing enough lace every year to go around the globe something like 13 times every year. But the part that really intrigues me the most about this company, in the early 20th century, of course, the era of the robber barons, and we know what was happening in the coal industries. Well, the Great Strike of 1902, the Long Strike, where the mine owners didn't want to pay the coal miners anything. They had starvation wages. They wanted kids working in the mines and so on and so forth. Scranton Lace Company, on the other hand, had free medical care for their employees. There was a nurse on duty 24 hours a day if you had a medical problem. There was a doctor on call all the time. They built parks for the employees, both out front and behind the facility. There were bowling alleys. There was a beautiful cafeteria. There was a full gymnasium. They had a theater. They had a stage. They put on plays. They had all sorts of things like that. There was stock sharing. You as an employee, you could actually purchase stock in the company. It was amazingly progressive for that era. And of course, people loved it. Now, the downside was that, for instance, if you were a woman, you could not be married. And there was a policy that said you are forbidden to marry, and companies could do that in that era. And likewise, if you became pregnant, you were immediately discharged. And in fact, one of those memos that comes out and states that is in the collection of the Lackawanna Historical Society. And that, to me, is really one of the tangibles of history, that it captures the essence of an earlier time, that earlier era. And you can't take it out of context necessarily and understand it as well, but yet it gives us that little bit of a window into that time. And you have a very progressive company like this. Well, the company closed it was 2001 or 2002. They shut the doors. We got a call, we being Lackawanna or Lackawanna Heritage Valley Authority, that we were welcome to come in and start to look through some of the records. And so I went down and spent about 3 months inside the building down there, going through all of the business records and all their various storage areas, hoping I wouldn't get lost inside. It was such a cavernous collection of buildings. It's something like 600,000 square feet inside. And we were able to preserve quite a number of records. The owner was incredibly generous in allowing us to take records out. But we're not in the collections business. That's not what a heritage area is for. And so I immediately talked to the Lackawanna Historical Society in Marianne and said, let's work together on this. And of course they came to the table and preserved this wonderful collection of records.
The community really benefits when all of these organizations work together and don't see themselves as just separate entities. I mean, sometimes it's easy to fall into that because everybody is worried about funding and how they're going to survive and their own mission. But what is beautiful in Lackawanna County is that I think a lot of these organizations see beyond that and how they're strength in numbers, and it is going to benefit the community. You just have more resources to dedicate time to doing projects. You may have more funding. You're just giving more opportunity and benefit to the public. More experiences, a better experience, and it's just friendly. It creates an environment and a community vibe where everybody's working together.
Okay, get ready, guys. I'm gonna blow my whistle, and you're off.
Well, I think that partnerships among local cultural organizations, particularly those related to the heritage. Lackawanna Heritage Valley Authority is a public agency that has a broad mission to engender partnerships. I think some of these groups that precede the Heritage Authority that have been here for quite a while, the Historic Society, the Anthracite Museum, they had been working in collegially and collaboratively for years and years. But I think having an entity like the Lackawanna Heritage Authority here can really help to broaden that, to expand the capacities of the individual organizations on their own to maybe work, well, here's two groups working together. But now with the authority, with the involvement of education entities like the Northeast Education Intermediate Unit, we can expand that and work on a number of levels, both work with the community and the general public as a whole, but then also work with students in our local school districts. And I think that's really key to get that outreach in the education.
We invited all of the social studies chair people of the 11 Lackawanna County schools that they invited the department chair people, and they could bring one other person with them. The goal of that then is for them to go back to their students and say, hey, there's this great historical society down there in Scranton. We need to take you down there. Long journeys begin with little steps, and we hope that more teachers will do this more often.
Because of my interest in local history, and as a teacher, I would sometimes take a week or so out of whatever class I had, and I'd talk about local history. There were a lot of people in the neighborhood who talked about how things had been, and it just fascinated me. My own house fascinated me, as when I'd go into the attic and see the old hand-forged nails, or I'd go into the stone basement, and and the story would be told how my grandfather had dug out this part of the basement, how there was a wine press over here, how in the back where the outhouse had been, how the building behind us had been used as a carriage house by one of the local doctors, and where he kept his horses and his wagons, and how he would come out at night and they could hear him getting the horses ready. Many times the students would be so interested, I decided that it might be nice to direct them to the Historic Society if they had a personal interest. And some of them would come over on their own. I did take a few field trips here and where we would visit. But the reason I had done it, as I said, was mostly because I wanted to kind of get the kids a chance to find out more about local history. And I decided that maybe I'll throw together a quick, small overview of Scranton history. And I did that and met with some initial success.
Being a member of the Lackawanna Historical Society offers many benefits. It allows you the opportunity to use their research facility and their wonderful archives and photo collection. It is such a repository for such great artifacts and great historical items. The opportunity to develop a whole variety of options, such as working on a book, publishing a manuscript, composing and putting together a DVD product, a biography, a documentary.
Well, I first became involved in the Historical Society when I was a senior in Marywood. I had to do a master's thesis, and everyone said to me, you absolutely cannot find information on the theater, because that's what I wanted to do, was all the great actors who came into Scranton in the 1880s and 1890s. Not only did I start from scratch, but once I had handed in the thesis, which was for the master's degree in history, then a few years later, I thought, well, maybe I can turn it into a book that people would be able to read. So it's been an ongoing project, and at the moment, I have just finished moving it up to this current year.
If people publish these books, it's fabulous, because then we get to sell the books in our bookstore, and it's just continuing the tools, building new tools. We have a brand new book that's out this summer that started out as a research project for a student who was doing his thesis. He came to the Historical Society, conducted some research. When he finished his thesis, he was very proud of it, so he sent a copy to the Historical Society. Our board members saw it, our publications committee, Bill Conlog, they were very excited about it. So we helped facilitate the publication of that book, Industrial Pioneers, which is now for sale in our bookstore, and we're doing the book launch party.
In addition to being a great resource, they're also a great networking opportunity. I met a lot of individuals here in Lackawanna County through the Historical Society, and just different contacts that helped me network in making the Rocky Glen documentary that I put together a few years later.
When evaluating the scrapbook collection, many of the scrapbooks were going to relate to local history. They were by people who would take an interest in mining, or they would take interest in, for example, construction of buildings. And these would be very useful from a historical standpoint. If someone comes in and said, I'd really like to find some original material on the World War I era, we can say, well, we do have a scrapbook that was kept by somebody. For example, there is a scrapbook where someone kept an account, a newspaper account of every soldier that was killed or wounded in Scranton. And that's very fascinating. And it's probably something that would not be available without a lot of preliminary research and actual going into the newspaper files and reading them and going on, which would take endless hours. So that scrapbook is right there and very, very useful, and it's well preserved now. The project I took on after the scrapbook project was going to be organizing the collection of atlases. Then Scranton, growing in the 1870s, merited its own atlas in 1877. And as we began looking at the atlases, many of them were in very poor condition. They had been often used by researchers with little regard to careful handling. Some of these people actually would go into an atlas, find out what they were looking for, and would razor it out or tear it out. With an atlas, there's always somebody coming in looking for the location of a home, looking for the location of a business, looking for some kind of information, whether it's going to be directly related to their family or to some political research they're doing or whatever type it might be. They are probably one of the most utilized bits of information at the Historical Society. There were maps that were drawn in the 1890s that they gave aerial views. And I mean, you could see the houses, you can see the porches, they're drawn in. It's as if someone went into the air. I don't know what kind of skill was required for this, but it's amazing that whoever designed the whole idea, you almost feel like they went into a balloon and looked down and made these drawings.
In addition to the Catlin House tours, we give city tours, which talk about the various buildings in the city of Scranton. And we talk about the architecture, the people who were the architects of the buildings. Some of them are very, very famous. We have Fred Olmsted, who did the gardens in front of the Albright Memorial Library. St. Luke's Episcopal Church downtown is where Governor and Mrs. Scranton were married. And it was designed by Richard Upjohn, who designed Trinity Church down on Wall Street in New York City. We have the famous architect Raymond Hood, who designed the Rockefeller Center in New York City, and he also designed the Scranton Cultural Center here in Scranton, Pennsylvania.
In October, we will have paranormal tours again in conjunction with the Northeast Paranormal Society. We're going to do them for the first 3 weekends in October. Last year, we had planned for 1 weekend, and what happened was we had such a response, we had to put it on for a second weekend. The paranormal investigators will go around to these buildings and determine whether or not they can detect any paranormal activity in there. And what we do is have the tours in conjunction with them, and we will talk about the history of the buildings, and they will talk about the paranormal activity that they have discovered in there.
I mean, I think we all know that many people had hard lives in this valley, and they were all immigrants from one place or the other, and certainly it seems that every generation that came after the first generation did better, but in many cases these buildings were built by the first people who came here. We just have some absolutely wonderful buildings, some early skyscrapers, and buildings from basically 1870 through 1930, and we have some nice modern work as well. Scranton avoided a lot of the urban renewal of the 50s and 60s that many other places had, so we emerged a bit threadbare but intact. And so the preservation movement has been strong here for 30 years or so, and I think because of that we have a pretty interesting streetscape in general. Just walking along Lackawanna Avenue, the other day, some women were walking along, and I sensed that they were not from here. And one said to the other, she says, "Boy, the buildings have a lot of character, don't they?" So it just off the cuff like that. And so I think we do. That we have a very kind of rich and interesting downtown with a lot of history and a lot of different styles, and again, all very walkable and all relatively contained.
Amazing architecture that you find particularly in downtown Scranton. It's really staggering, and we take it for granted.
And I enjoy the city walking tours because of the various people you meet on the tours. I had one man who was quite interesting. As we approached the City Hall, he gave me an interesting bit of information that I never knew, so you learn from the people you tour with as well as they learning from you. I had told him that the fire engine doors were wider than normal when the City Hall was built, because in the early days, in the 1800s, the fire engines were pulled by horses. And he said to me, "Do you know why they always have Dalmatian dogs on the fire engines with the horses?" And I said, "No, I don't know." And he said, "Well, horses are afraid of fire, and the Dalmatian dogs have a calming effect on the horses." What I learned from the people I take on tours, what I learned from reading, I can take back into the classroom and give to my students when I'm teaching the subject of social studies.
I mean, I think the two powerhouses have been Mary Ann Moran Sabakinis and Alan Sweeney, definitely. I mean, I think when they teamed up, it must be 12 years ago that Alan became the president. I mean, the two of them just were a perfect match for each other, and I felt that they just took the society in the most wonderful direction, adding all kinds of programming, just continuing to professionalize the whole, just the whole process of running a historical society. I think they were just absolute powerhouses.
The position in which I find myself right now as president of the Historical Society, I hope to be able to continue the success of the organization in terms of its public image, its help and relationships, partnerships with other organizations in the community, its financial success through membership, through grants that are received, through sponsorships that are received, through bequests and gifts that people give to the Historical Society. And that takes many forms, whether people who decide to make us the beneficiary of an annual appeal, or whether somebody decides to make us the beneficiary of in their estate or in their insurance, their life insurance, or in some significant way that people would have an opportunity to continue what they perceive as important work in our community.
Not unlike other smaller cultural organizations, the Lackawanna Historical Society is dependent on grant funding. We do have what is considered a small budget. We're just over $100,000 for a year, and with that comes our membership support, which is a percentage of our budget, and then we have our research fees and our library users and our sales. But it's really the grants that drive our programs.
What we do is help our partners, like Lackawanna Historical Society, do their jobs better. We're there as a granting agency. Sometimes people joke that we do very little on our own. We need partners to really put the shine on the apple.
Well, I hope that we can stay in this old house and maintain our collections here. You know, there's a lot of changes going on around us. The university's getting larger and they are building. I hope the funding continues from different sources. I hope people continue to be interested in supporting the Historical Society.
As a member, I think one of the great benefits is the newsletter of the Lackawanna Historic Society. I've been getting it just about my whole life. You know, my dad was an editor of it at a period, but it's great. The stories are great. They're short, they're concise. You can read them while you're having your coffee in the morning, and they've got a great schedule of activities that's in every newsletter, and you get to see what's happening here at the Society and what's going on with some of our partner organizations throughout the community. So
many people never think that, you know, I go to this place, I see some great things. There is a donation box, but there's not many people who are going to drop very much money into a donation box. And so by being a member, there's that sustaining ability of the Historic Society to keep things going. And the more people that can join, even if they're not able to come on a regular basis, even if they can't come to a meeting, to take a family membership or to take some kind of membership to keep the Historic Society viable.
And some of the fun programs that I talked about, like the cemetery walks, the church walks, the downtown history walks, the ice cream social, the Civil War ball. There's no end to the programs here, and there's something for everybody just about every month. And I don't know how the staff does it. They have my enduring admiration.
The Lackawanna Historical Society's most important treasure are its volunteers. These are the people who make the organization successful. They are dedicated beyond comprehension.
It's never really going to be finished, but continue to restore the building because it is a treasure, it is a beautiful building, and it's been a great space for us. I would like to get some climate control in here so we can further to preserve our artifacts. I would hopefully, maybe in the future years, redo some of the exhibits upstairs to freshen them up a little bit. I would also like someone to leave us millions of dollars so we can pay for all this. So that's the area I will be working on.
The fun thing about the Historical Society is there's something for everybody here, and it's fun to come here. The other documentary I had worked on was on mountain biking in Lackawanna County, which at first thought you might not think that has anything to do with history, but we actually had a number of bike clubs in the area back in the 1880s. So, where do I go to find those photos? The Lackawanna Historical Society. I also wanted some pictures of just how people used to recreate a long time ago. So they found some great photos of people canoeing and jumping off bridges in the area, swimming. So the way I approach research is if I do have an idea, they have a wonderful woman here who manages the photographs, and you kind of call up or come in and visit, and I'm looking for some photos on this. You can also look through them yourself, which is sometimes just fun to do because you don't know what you're going to come across. The people here are phenomenal. If you have a question, you can come in. It's kind of always makes me feel like the old TV show Cheers, where everybody knows your name. If you have any kind of crazy history question, if you are working on an independent project and you need a photograph, they're always willing to help. If you're into genealogy, it's a great resource. You can experience many of their programs and lectures at a discount or for free. They have a members Christmas event, members only, that's just beautiful. So those are just some of the benefits. Help, I think, again, just it's not a lot of money, and the good it does to support this building, the staff. It's our history in Lackawanna County. And it's just it's a beautiful building and a wealth of resources here for all types of history. I would definitely recommend becoming a member.
And you're a part of history, an important part of history.